The Galactic High Council had been meeting for 600 years without a single uninvited guest, a single awkward pause, or a single species that showed up without first spending at least a decade begging for entry. 600 years of perfect, self-congratulatory order, then humans got an invitation. Now, to be fair, the council did not exactly roll out the welcome mat. The invitation was more of a reluctant acknowledgement that humans had somehow, against all reasonable expectations, built functional faster-than-light ships, contacted 3 neighboring systems, and refused to be ignored any longer. The council voted on whether to invite them. The vote was close. Very close. Vrexen, the council leader, a tall silver-skinned being who had never been wrong about anything in his life, at least according to himself, opened the session with his usual elegance. "We welcome today," he announced, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone who had been in charge far too long, "our newest and most unexpected guests, the inhabitants of the planet Earth." A small human aide in the back quietly said, "Earth." Vrexen paused. "Yes. Earth. As I said." He had not said it as anyone said it. But no one corrected him a second time. At least not out loud. The 5 council species settled into their seats, robes arranged, postures perfectly composed, all wearing the same politely condescending expression that powerful people wear when they are about to meet someone they have already decided is beneath them. They had reviewed the human files. They had read the reports. They had seen the numbers. They were not impressed. Quelith of the Serati leaned toward his colleague and whispered, just loud enough to be diplomatic about it, "Remarkable, really. That they made it this far." His colleague clicked in quiet agreement. It was, all things considered, exactly the kind of welcome you would give a dog that had somehow learned to open doors. Impressive in a technical sense. Slightly unsettling. But nothing to worry about. The doors to the council chamber opened, the humans walked in. The council had seen many species walk through those doors for the first time. The Serati had entered weeping with gratitude. The Volmori had bowed so low their head crests scraped the floor. The Drethkai had trembled visibly for the first 20 minutes, and one of them had actually fainted, which the council still talked about fondly at gatherings. Every species, without exception, had walked into this chamber and immediately understood the weight of where they were standing. The grandeur. The history. The overwhelming privilege of being allowed inside. The humans walked in, and Darius Cole, commander of the UES Relentless, first human representative to the Galactic High Council, looked around the room with the calm, unhurried expression of a man who had seen meeting rooms before and was not particularly moved by this one. That he looked left. He looked right, then he looked at the nearest council aide and said, "Is there a coffee machine anywhere in this building?" The aide blinked 4 of his 6 eyes. Vrexen, who had prepared a welcome speech, held his speech. "A what?" the aide managed. "Coffee," Darius said. "Hot drink. Dark. Slightly bitter. If you have something close to it, I will figure it out myself." The aide looked at Vrexen. Vrexen looked at Quelith. Quelith looked at his report on humans, flipped 3 pages, found no mention of this coffee ritual, and for the first time in his academic career felt genuinely underprepared. "We do not have that," the aide said carefully. Darius nodded, unbothered. "All right. We brought our own." He glanced back, and one of his team members was already pulling a sealed thermal container from a bag. The council watched this in complete silence. This was not how it was supposed to go. There was supposed to be awe. There was supposed to be reverence. There was supposed to be, at minimum, some acknowledgement that they were standing in the most powerful room in the known galaxy. Instead, a human was pouring himself a hot drink and asking if there were chairs. Vrexen smiled through it. He was very good at smiling through things, but somewhere in the back of his very experienced mind, a small and unfamiliar feeling had just introduced itself. He did not have a name for it yet. He would, later. Vrexen was, above all things, a politician, and politicians, regardless of species, galaxy, or number of limbs, share one universal skill. They can ask deeply invasive questions while making them sound like polite conversation. It is practically an art form. Vrexen had been practicing this art for 240 years, and he was, by any measure, a master of it. He folded his long silver fingers together, leaned forward with a warm smile that did not reach any of his 3 eyes, and began. "So," he said pleasantly, "tell us about yourselves. Your civilization. How are things progressing on Earth?" "Earth," said the same aide from before, very quietly. Vrexen did not acknowledge this. Darius took a slow sip of his coffee, set the cup down, and said, "Things are going well. Thanks for asking." A pause. Vrexen's smile held. "And your infrastructure? Your fleet development? How many vessels would you say humanity currently maintains?" There it was. Wrapped in casual curiosity, delivered with a warm tilt of the head. A perfectly constructed nothing question that was absolutely not a nothing question. Darius looked at the ceiling for half a second, the way a man looks when he is doing simple arithmetic he already knows the answer to. Active deep space vessels, roughly 41,000. That does not include planetary defense fleets or the reserve formations. Those numbers are a bit higher. The room did not gasp. Council members were far too dignified to gasp, but 3 of them stopped breathing at the same time, which is essentially the same thing. Vrexen's smile flickered. Just once. Just briefly. Like a light in a room where someone had walked past the switch without touching it, the Serati delegate, Quelith, very slowly uncrossed his legs and recrossed them the other way. The council had estimated, based on 2 centuries of observation, that humans might have developed somewhere between 300 and 800 vessels by now. That had been the generous estimate. The optimistic one. The number that the more nervous council members had quietly worried about before being reassured that they were overthinking it. 41,000. Not including reserves. Vrexen cleared his throat. That is, a considerable number. We have a lot of space to cover, Darius said simply, and picked up his coffee again. There was a long pause in which everyone in the room was doing some version of the same mental calculation and nobody was happy with the results. Zorvith, the youngest delegate, leaned sideways toward his senior colleague and whispered, "Did he say 41? His colleague did not respond. His colleague was still on the math. Vrexen smoothly moved to his next question, because that is what you do when the first question has already ruined your entire morning. "And your weapons development?" he asked. Still smiling. The smile was doing a lot of work at this point. Darius tilted his head. "Which kind?" "Which kind?" 2 words. "Enormous damage." Quelith quietly closed the folder in front of him, because whatever was written inside it was now embarrassingly out of date and he did not want anyone to see him referencing it. Now, every council session had a moment where someone stood up and made everyone else feel slightly inferior through the aggressive use of research. It was tradition. It was structure. It was, frankly, the part most council members looked forward to because it meant someone else was talking and they could think about other things while nodding. Today, that someone was Quelith. Quelith of the Serati was the galaxy's foremost expert on emerging civilizations. He had written 47 academic papers. He had received 9 prestigious awards, 2 of which he mentioned in casual conversation within minutes of meeting anyone new. He had spent the last 200 years personally overseeing the observation and documentation of humanity, which he considered the crowning achievement of an already impressive career. He had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. He stood up slowly, deliberately, with the energy of a man who had rehearsed standing up. He straightened his robes. He adjusted the data tablet in his hands. He looked out at the room with the satisfied expression of someone about to deliver information that would absolutely reframe everything for everyone present. Then he cleared his throat, then he cleared it again, then a third time. Darius watched this with patient, genuine curiosity, the way you watch a street performer set up a trick you have not seen before. Quelith cleared his throat a 4th time, appeared satisfied with the result, and began. After 200 years of careful, methodical, and I must say extraordinarily thorough observation, he said, pausing to let the word thorough do its intended work, I am prepared to present to this council the definitive profile of the human species. He tapped his data tablet. A holographic display bloomed above the center of the table. He looked at Darius the way a doctor looks at a patient before delivering results. Darius looked back at him the way a patient looks at a doctor when they already know they are fine. Humans, Quelith began, with the tone of a man narrating a nature documentary about a species that could not hear him, are, by every measurable galactic standard, inefficient. He let that word land. He had practiced letting that word land. It landed well. They sleep, he continued, pulling up the relevant data chart with a small flourish, for approximately 1/3 of every single day. Not in shifts. Not strategically. Simply because they must. Their biology demands it. If they do not sleep, they begin to malfunction in ways that are, quite frankly, alarming to observe. The Volmori delegate nodded slowly. The Drethkai representative made a quiet sound of agreement. Vrexen had his fingers folded again and was wearing the expression of a man whose suspicions were being confirmed one by one. Quelith moved to the next point with visible enthusiasm. They eat between 5 and 6 times daily. Not for fuel optimization. Not on any logical schedule. Largely based on emotion, habit, and something they call cravings, which our researchers spent 11 years trying to understand before concluding it was simply want without necessity. A quiet ripple of amusement moved through the council. The polite, restrained kind. The kind that says we are better than this but we are enjoying hearing about it anyway. Quelith was warming up now. He clicked to the next slide. Humans are intensely, almost exhaustingly emotional. They make significant decisions, including military, political, and economic ones, based on feelings rather than pure data. They have a documented history of going to war over perceived insults, romantic entanglements, and in at least 3 recorded cases, the outcomes of sporting competitions. The Sarah T delegate beside Quelith let out a short sound that was the alien equivalent of a laugh quickly converted into a cough. They fight each other, Quelith continued, with remarkable regularity. Not just between nations. Within them. Within cities. Within families. Our longest-running observation post recorded 47 separate human conflicts occurring simultaneously in one geographic region over a period of 12 years. 47. He paused to make sure everyone appreciated that number. They did. And perhaps most critically, he said, saving what he clearly considered the most revealing point for last, humans require constant entertainment. Music, storytelling, games, humor, competition. Remove these things and human psychological stability deteriorates rapidly. They do not merely enjoy distraction. They need it. Biologically. A human without stimulation becomes, according to our researchers, and I am quoting directly here, deeply unpleasant to be around. Genuine laughter this time. Still restrained, still diplomatic, but real. Vrexen was nodding with the deep satisfaction of a man whose worldview was being academically validated in real time. Quelith straightened up, closed the first section of his report, and looked at Darius with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite getting there. Darius had not moved during any of this. He was leaning back in his chair, one ankle crossed over his knee, coffee cup resting on the table beside him, wearing a small, unhurried smile, not an embarrassed smile. Not a defensive one. Just the smile of a man who had heard something he found genuinely funny and was deciding whether or not it was the right moment to say so. He decided it was not. YET.SO. He just nodded pleasantly at Quelith, the way you nod at someone who has just spent 20 minutes explaining a joke that you were already in on. Vrexen gestured toward Darius with the gracious, slightly theatrical hospitality of someone who already knows how the conversation is going to go. Commander Cole, he said smoothly, you have heard the findings. Please, feel free to respond. It was the kind of invitation that was not really an invitation. It was the kind of offer you make to someone when you are certain they have nothing useful to say, but courtesy requires you to let them say it anyway. The galaxy's most elegant trap door. Darius uncrossed his ankle. He leaned forward. He picked up his coffee, found it empty, set it back down with the quiet acceptance of a man who had survived worse disappointments than an empty cup. Then he looked at Quelith. You are right, he said. Quelith blinked. That was not the opening he had prepared for. About all of it, Darius continued, his voice carrying no defensiveness, no embarrassment, no urgency whatsoever. Just a calm, almost comfortable acknowledgement. We sleep too much. We eat constantly. We are emotional to a degree that has, on multiple occasions, genuinely baffled our own scientists. We fight each other. We have been fighting each other since before we had proper weapons to do it with, which if you think about it is somehow more impressive and more concerning at the same time. A small sound from somewhere at the table. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not one either. We need entertainment or we lose our minds. That is completely true. One of our early space exploration programs had to be redesigned 3 times because the crew kept going stir-crazy on long voyages. We eventually just added a games room and the problem mostly solved itself. Queleth looked down at his report and then back up, uncertain whether to be pleased that his findings were being confirmed or troubled by how unbothered the confirmation was making Darius. So yes, Darius said, spreading his hands in a gesture of total, cheerful agreement. All of it. Accurate. Well researched. Genuinely, I mean that, 200 years of observation and you got the details right. That is solid work. Queleth opened his mouth, Darius kept going. We are inefficient. We are messy. We are loud and emotional and we have spent a significant portion of our history making decisions that our own historians later described as baffling. We have burned things we should have kept, lost things we should have protected, and repeated mistakes with a consistency that would suggest we were doing it on purpose if you did not know us well enough to understand that we genuinely just forgot. The council was very still now. There was something in the rhythm of what Darius was saying that did not feel like a man defending himself. It felt like something else. Nobody had quite identified it yet. Darius paused. He looked around the table slowly, making brief eye contact with each delegate in the unhurried way of someone who has nowhere else to be and nothing to prove. And despite all of that, he said, his voice dropping just slightly, not for drama, just the natural drop of someone saying something they know to be simply, completely true, we are still here. 3 words, still here, they fell into the room the way a stone falls into still water. Not loudly. But the ripples went everywhere. Vrexen's expression did not change. He was too experienced for that. But his fingers, still folded on the table, pressed together just a fraction tighter. Queleth was doing something with his face that he probably did not realize he was doing. A kind of slow, reluctant recalculation. The expression of a man whose report had just developed a crack he had not designed into it. Zorveth, the youngest delegate, was staring at Darius with his head tilted at a slight angle, the way you stare at something when your brain has noticed a pattern your conscious mind has not caught up to yet. Nobody laughed this time. The comfortable amusement that had been sitting in the room like a well-fed pet had quietly gotten up and left. Something else had taken its place. Nobody named it out loud, but everybody felt it. The silence after Darius spoke lasted exactly long enough to become uncomfortable. Vrexen was preparing to steer the conversation somewhere safer, somewhere with agenda items and procedural language and the kind of structured dialogue that keeps rooms from feeling the way this room was currently feeling. He was very good at this. He had been doing it for centuries. He already had the words forming that he did not get to use them, because Zorveth spoke first. Zorveth was the youngest delegate on the Galactic High Council by a considerable margin. He was there primarily because his predecessor had retired unexpectedly and the replacement process had moved faster than anticipated. Most of the senior council members treated him the way senior people everywhere treat younger colleagues who ask too many questions. With patience that was mostly just delayed irritation, Zorveth had a habit of saying the thing that everyone in the room was thinking but had collectively agreed, without any formal discussion, not to say. It was not a political gift. It was, depending on who you asked, either refreshing or exhausting. Today it was both. He leaned forward in his seat, looked directly at Darius with the open, unguarded curiosity of someone who had not yet learned to be strategic about his curiosity, and asked, in a voice that was completely genuine and completely without any awareness of the grenade he was rolling across the table, but what is the true purpose of a human? The question landed in the center of the room and just sat there. Vrexen closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Queleth looked at Zorvith the way a senior academic looks at a student who has just asked the question that dismantles the entire framework of the lecture. The Volmori delegate made a very quiet sound, and then, because the question was out there and could not be retrieved, and because several of them were now also wondering the same thing but would never have said it, a ripple of nervous laughter moved around the table. The careful, social kind. The kind that says this is funny while also saying please do not actually answer that. Darius did not laugh. He did not deflect. He did not smile immediately. He did not reach for his empty coffee cup as a prop the way people reach for things when they are buying themselves a moment. He just went quiet. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 full seconds of complete stillness, which in a room full of beings who had spent centuries mastering the art of never showing uncertainty, felt like a very long time indeed. Every eye in the chamber was on him. Darius looked at Zorvith, and then, slowly, he began to answer. We are not built for peace, Darius said. He did not say it with aggression. He did not say it with pride, exactly. He said it the way you state a fact about weather or geography. Simply. Accurately. Without any particular need for the listener to be comfortable with it. I want to be clear about that because I think there has been a fundamental misunderstanding sitting at the center of every observation your researchers have made over the last 200 years. You looked at us and you saw chaos. You saw inefficiency. You saw a species that could not get out of its own way long enough to be properly civilized. And you were not wrong about what you saw. You were wrong about what it meant. Queleth had stopped pretending to reference his report, Vrexen had stopped pretending to take notes, the room was doing the thing rooms do when something important is being said. It was getting quieter than quiet. The kind of quiet where you become aware of your own breathing. We are not built for logic either, Darius continued. Not primarily. Logic is a tool we pick up when we need it and put down when something more urgent is required. We are not a logical species the way you mean it. Cold, clean, optimal. That is not us. That has never been us. He paused. Not for effect. Just because what came next needed its own space. We are built to endure. He let that sit for exactly as long as it needed to. 300 years ago, a disease moved through our eastern continent. Not a small disease. Not a manageable one. A disease that killed 1 in every 2 people it touched. Half. Gone. In less than 4 years. The population of entire regions simply stopped existing. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years went silent. Nobody at the table moved. They rebuilt, Darius said. Not eventually. Not after a long period of recovery and careful planning. They buried their dead and they rebuilt. Some of them were still sick while they were doing it. Some of them rebuilt the same cities in the same places knowing full well that the disease might come back. It did come back. They rebuilt again. Zorvith had both hands flat on the table now without appearing to realize it. Before that, we had wars. Not skirmishes. Not territorial disputes settled in a few years. Wars that ran for decades. Wars that flattened entire civilizations down to the foundation stones. Wars that erased languages, cultures, bloodlines, architectures that had taken centuries to develop. Gone. And then the survivors, who had nothing, who were standing in the ruins of everything their ancestors had built, looked at the rubble and started stacking the stones back up. Darius looked around the room slowly. Further back, we had an ice age. Most of the large animals that shared our planet did not survive it. The ones that did were never the same. Ecosystems collapsed. Food sources disappeared. By every reasonable biological metric, humans should not have made it through. We did not have the fur. We did not have the mass. We did not have the physical advantages that survival in that environment logically required. He picked up his empty coffee cup, looked at it briefly, set it back down. We had stubbornness. That is not a joke. That is a genuine assessment. We survived an ice age primarily because we are too stubborn to acknowledge when something is impossible. We looked at an environment that was killing us and collectively decided that it was the environment's problem. Quelith made a very small sound. Not a laugh. Not quite. But something adjacent to one that had taken a wrong turn somewhere. Famines. Floods. Volcanic winters that blocked out the sun for years. Extinctions of nearly every large species around us. Every single one of these things happened to us, to our planet, to our population. And after every single one of them, we were still here. Smaller sometimes. Damaged always. But here. Darius leaned forward now, just slightly. Not because we were the strongest species on our planet. We were not. Not because we were the fastest or the most physically capable. We were not that either. There were things sharing our world that could kill us without any particular effort and frequently did. He looked at Zorvith directly, because Zorvith had asked the question and deserved the answer aimed at him. We survived because we do not stop. That is the purpose of a human. That is the only honest answer I can give you. We do not have a biological off switch for trying. We do not have a point at which our species looks at the scale of a problem and decides the problem has won. We have come close. There have been moments in our history where it was genuinely unclear whether we were going to make it through to the next century. And in every single one of those moments, somewhere, some group of humans was already working on the solution. Not because they were certain it would work. Because they were incapable of not trying. He sat back, the room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the building systems. That is what we are, Darius said simply. We are the species that does not stop. Not for disease. Not for war. Not for ice or famine or the extinction of everything around us. You asked what our purpose is. That is it. To endure. To keep going. To get up one more time than we get knocked down, every single time, without exception, for as long as we exist. He looked around the table one final time. You have been watching us for 200 years and calling it inefficiency. I understand why. From the outside it probably looks like chaos. But what you were actually watching was a species practicing the only skill that has ever mattered to us. He smiled. Quiet. Certain. We were practicing surviving. Nobody spoke. This was not the comfortable silence of a room that had just heard something pleasant. This was not the appreciative pause that follows a well-delivered speech at a formal dinner. This was not even the politely stunned silence of a council that had been surprised by unexpected information and needed a moment to recalibrate. This was the silence of a room full of very intelligent beings who had just done the same calculation from several different directions and arrived at the same answer every single time. Quelith closed his report, not dramatically. Not with any particular gesture. Just slowly, with both hands, the way you close something when you have accepted that what is written inside it is no longer the most important document in the room. He set it flat on the table in front of him and rested his hands on top of it and looked at nothing in particular. 200 years of research. 47 academic papers. 9 awards. And he had spent the entire time studying the bark of the tree and calling it a comprehensive analysis of the forest. Vrexen had stopped smiling. This was significant. Vrexen's smile was essentially a permanent fixture. It had survived trade negotiations that collapsed into diplomatic incidents. It had survived 2 attempted votes of no confidence. It had survived 600 years of council politics, which was a more hostile environment than most people appreciated. The smile was not just an expression. It was infrastructure. It was gone now that he was sitting very straight, the way people sit when they are using posture as a substitute for certainty, and he was looking at Darius with an expression that had moved well past assessment and into something that took up residence much closer to the back of the mind. The place where serious things live. The place you try not to visit too often because the view from there changes how everything else looks. Zorvith was doing math, you could see it. His eyes had the particular unfocused quality of someone running numbers internally, and whatever numbers he was running, the answers were not landing well. He would get one result, check it, get the same result, check it again, and his expression each time was the expression of someone hoping the calculator is broken. It was not broken. 41,000 vessels not including reserves. 17 extinction level events survived. A species that responded to an ice age with stubbornness. A species that rebuilt cities while still sick from the disease that had destroyed them. A species that had been knocked down by forces that eliminated every comparable species around them and had, every single time, gotten back up. Zorvith did the math 4 different ways, the answers were the same. He stopped doing the math. On the far end of the table, the Drethkai delegate leaned toward the Volmori representative beside him and whispered something. It was a very quiet whisper. The kind that is meant only for one set of ears, but the room was that silent, everyone heard it. What he whispered was, "We have been calling them primitive for 200 years. The Volmori representative did not whisper back. He just gave a very small, very slow nod, the kind of nod that means yes, and we should probably think carefully about what that says about us. Darius sat at the other end of the table, relaxed, hands resting comfortably, watching the room the way a person watches weather moving in from a distance. Not threatening anything. Not performing anything. Just present. Patient. Completely unbothered by the silence in the way that only someone who has never needed the room's approval can be completely unbothered. The most powerful council in the known galaxy sat in silence, and for the first time in 600 years of meetings, not one of them was entirely sure who the most powerful species in the room actually was. Darius let the silence breathe for a moment longer, then, with the calm and unhurried energy of a man who is not trying to win an argument because he does not need to, he said, "Can I ask you all something?" Nobody objected. Nobody looked like they particularly wanted to invite whatever was coming next, but nobody objected. "In your combined histories," Darius said, looking around the table slowly, "how many extinction-level events has each of your species survived?" He asked it simply. Conversationally. The way you ask someone how many times they have visited a particular city, the silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one before it. The previous silence had been stunned. This one was uncomfortable in a more specific, more personal way. The way silence gets when a question has arrived that everyone in the room knows the answer to but nobody wants to be the first to say it out loud. Vrexen's jaw moved slightly. Quelith looked at the closed report under his hands as though considering whether opening it again would help, correctly determined that it would not, and looked back up. Zorvith, who had at least established himself today as the delegate most willing to engage with uncomfortable realities, said quietly, "The Serati have faced one significant planetary crisis. Approximately 40,000 years ago. A solar event. We adapted our infrastructure and survived." Darius nodded. 1. Good. The Volmori representative said, with the careful tone of someone who already sees where this road goes, "have no recorded extinction-level events in our history." The Drethkai, said the Drethkai delegate, even more carefully, have faced 2 near-extinction scenarios. Both were resolved through early detection and coordinated evacuation. Resolved through early detection, Darius nodded at each of them with genuine, unpatronizing respect. The nod of a person who is not mocking anyone. Who is simply collecting information. Then he said, 17. No tablet in front of him. No notes. No data display hovering above the table. He just said the number the way you say your own age or your own name. A thing so fundamental to your identity that it lives in a completely different part of your memory from things you have to look up. 17 extinction-level events, he said. That we know of. That our geological and archaeological record has confirmed. Events that, by every scientific standard your researchers and ours would agree on, should have ended us. Asteroid impacts. Supervolcanic eruptions. Gamma-ray bursts. Pandemics. Ice ages. Magnetic pole reversals. Climate collapses. 17 separate moments in our history where the math said we were done. He paused. We were not done. Queleth had the expression of a man who had dedicated his career to studying a subject and was only now, in this room, beginning to understand what the subject actually was. The Volmori representative was very still. No recorded extinction-level events. He had always considered that a point of pride. The sophistication of a civilization that had never been brought to the edge. The mark of a species that had developed wisely, carefully, without the ugly chaos of humans stumbling through catastrophe after catastrophe. He was reconsidering the pride part. Because there is a difference, he was quietly realizing, between a species that has never been tested and a species that has been tested 17 times. One of them knows what they are made of. You have been watching us for 200 years, Darius said, and his voice carried no sharpness, no accusation, just the clean delivery of a factual observation, and in that time you categorized us by our weaknesses. Our emotions. Our inefficiency. Our tendency to fight each other. And those things are real. I already agreed with all of them. He looked around the table one more time. But your researchers spent 200 years documenting what humans look like on a calm day. They never asked what we look like when everything is trying to kill us. He smiled. Small. Certain. That is a different report entirely. Queleth looked down at the closed folder under his hands. For the 9th award-winning, 47-paper writing, 200-year researching foremost expert on emerging civilizations in the known galaxy, it was a deeply, profoundly humbling moment. He did not open the report. There did not seem to be any point. Vrexen was, as previously established, a politician, and politicians. When a conversation has moved into territory that is making everyone in the room quietly reassess their life choices. Do what politicians have always done across every species and every galaxy that has ever produced them, they pivot. Vrexen unfolded his fingers. He refolded them. He straightened in his seat with the deliberate composure of a man rebuilding his dignity one vertebra at a time. He recalibrated his expression into something that was not quite the original smile but was doing its best to fill the same role. A substitute smile. A smile working overtime. Commander Cole, he said, and his voice was measured, professional, carrying only the faintest trace of a higher register than it had occupied at the start of the session, a detail that everyone noticed and nobody mentioned. We did not invite humanity to this council purely as an academic exercise. I know, Darius said. Vrexen paused. He had prepared a longer lead-in to this part. We invited you, he continued, adjusting smoothly, because we believe the current moment calls for something this council has not pursued in some time. Expansion. Partnership. A formal alliance between humanity and the Galactic High Council, built on mutual respect, shared resources, and collective security. He delivered this with the polished confidence of a speech that had been written, rewritten, rehearsed, and stress-tested by at least 4 advisors before this meeting. It was a good speech. Under different circumstances it would have landed beautifully. Darius nodded slowly. The nod of a man who is listening but is also, simultaneously, reading the room behind the words. Collective security, he said. Yes. That is an interesting phrase, Darius said pleasantly. It usually means someone is afraid of something specific. Vrexen's substitute smile held by sheer professional force of will. There are threats, he acknowledged, with the careful understatement of someone who has been describing a house fire as a heating irregularity, at the edges of explored space. A species. The Vorkai. They have been, destabilizing certain regions. Destabilizing, Darius said. Destroying, Zorvith said, from the other end of the table, because apparently he had decided that today was the day he was going to keep saying the accurate version of things regardless of the diplomatic consequences. Vrexen did not look at Zorvith. They have been active, Vrexen said, threading carefully between his word and Zorvith's word and landing somewhere in the middle that satisfied nobody, along the outer edges of council space. Several inhabited worlds have been lost. The council has been managing the situation. Managing, Darius said, with the tone of someone tasting a word and finding it nutritionally empty. Monitoring, Vrexen corrected, which was somehow worse. Darius looked at him with an expression of calm, attentive patience. The expression of a man who has decided to let someone finish before responding, not because he does not have a response, but because the finishing is important. How long, Darius said, has this been going on? Vrexen's fingers tightened slightly on the table. The Vorkai have been a presence in outer regions for some time, he said. How long, Darius said again, same tone, same patience, a precise repetition that made it quietly clear that he was not going to accept a direction as an answer when he had asked for a distance. Vrexen held his gaze for a moment, then he said, approximately 400 years. Darius stared at him, not with anger. Not with theatrical disbelief. Just a long, steady, completely still stare that lasted several seconds and communicated, with no words at all, an entire paragraph of what he was thinking, the kind of stare that says I am going to need a moment with this information. 400 years, not 4 years. Not 40. 400 years of worlds being destroyed on the edges of the galaxy and the most powerful governing body in known space had been, and he wanted to make sure he had the right word. Monitoring it, Darius looked at Vrexen, then he looked at Quelith, then at Zorvith, who had the decency to look at least partially mortified, then back at Vrexen. 400 years, Darius said that it was not a question. It was just the number, placed back on the table between them, where it could sit in full view of everyone and be properly appreciated for the size of it. Vrexen said nothing, the substitute smile was gone now too. Darius laughed, not a polite laugh. Not a social laugh. Not the carefully measured chuckle that diplomats deploy when something is mildly amusing but the situation requires restraint. A real laugh. The kind that starts somewhere genuine and comes out without asking permission first. It was not mean. There was no cruelty in it. It was not the laugh of someone mocking the room or the people in it. It was simply the laugh of a person who has just heard something that struck them as genuinely, unavoidably funny, and whose body responded accordingly before his diplomacy could intervene. The two members of his team sitting behind him exchanged a glance. Then they started laughing too. The effect on the council was immediate and dramatic. Vrexen went very still in the way that extremely dignified people go still when something is happening that their dignity does not have a prepared response for. Quelith's hands, which had been resting on top of his closed report for the past several minutes, jerked slightly at the sound. The report slid off the table. He caught it. Just barely. Then he set it back down and stared at it as though it had moved on its own. Zorvith gripped the edge of the table with both hands. Not aggressively. Just the reflexive grip of someone who had experienced several significant surprises in the last hour and was physically anchoring himself against the possibility of more. The Volmori representative looked at the Drethkai delegate. The Drethkai delegate looked back. Neither of them had an expression that covered this situation, so they were both wearing the same vaguely stunned blankness of beings watching something they had no cultural framework to process. Laughter.in The Galactic High Council Chamber.in response to a disclosure about a 400-year existential threat. It was, by any measure, the most alarming thing that had happened in this room in 6 centuries. Including the time the Drethkai delegate had fainted, Darius brought himself back with the ease of a man who laughs often and recovers from it quickly. He pressed his hand briefly to the table, a small grounding gesture, took a breath, and looked at Vrexen with an expression that was warm and genuine and completely without apology. I am sorry, he said, and meant it in the specific way that means I am not sorry for laughing, but I am sorry that the laughing was confusing. I am not laughing at you. I want to be very clear about that. Vrexen waited. I am laughing, Darius said, because we have a word for this. For what you are describing. For a species that moves through inhabited space destroying worlds, building nothing, taking nothing, just ending things. We have encountered that pattern before. Not once. 3 times. In our own history, before we ever left our solar system, we dealt with versions of this problem 3 separate times. Quelith stared at him. You dealt with extinction-level aggressor species 3 times before achieving interstellar travel? Well, Darius said, with the slight head tilt of a man being technically precise, 2 of them were us doing it to ourselves, which is a different conversation. But the 3rd one was external, yes. Nobody knew what to do with that sentence, so everyone quietly agreed to move past it. The point is, Darius continued, we know what the Vorkai are. We know the pattern. A species that has optimized entirely for destruction, that mistakes the absence of resistance for an invitation, that has been doing what it does for so long that it has started to believe nothing can stop it. He looked around the table. We have a name for species like that. Vrexen leaned forward almost imperceptibly. What do you call them? Darius smiled. Tuesday, he said, silence, complete, total, unbroken silence. Zorvatha's grip on the table tightened. I do not understand that reference, Vrexen said carefully. It means, Darius said, settling back comfortably in his chair, ordinary. Routine. The kind of problem that shows up regularly enough that you have stopped being surprised by it and started just dealing with it. He paused. Tuesday is a day of the week. It is not special. It does not frighten anyone. It just shows up and you handle it, and then it is Wednesday. Quelith was looking at Darius with the expression of a man who had spent 200 years writing a report about a species and had just realized, with complete and humbling clarity, that the report was a description of the cover and not the book. You are not afraid of the Vorkai, Vrexen said. It came out less like an observation and more like a man quietly updating a very important file. We have not met them yet, Darius said fairly. So I cannot speak to the specifics. But the pattern? He shook his head with the easy confidence of someone dismissing a concern they have already lived through. No. The pattern does not scare us. He looked at Vrexen with an expression that was almost kind. You have been managing this for 400 years, he said. We have been flying faster than light for 30. And you called us for help. He did not say this with arrogance, that he said it with the quiet, matter-of-fact delivery of a person reading a sentence out loud and letting the sentence speak for itself. The sentence spoke for itself, loudly. The laughter was gone now. The room had moved through several distinct emotional territories since the humans had walked in, starting with smug condescension, passing through academic superiority, taking a sharp turn into stunned recalculation, and arriving here, at this quiet, stripped-down place where there was no more performance left in anyone. Vrexen looked at Darius, not with the three-eyed, carefully constructed gaze of the Galactic High Council's most experienced leader managing a diplomatic session. Just a look. Direct. Undecorated. The look of someone who has run out of layers to present and is communicating from whatever is underneath all of them. Will you help us? He asked. That it was the quietest he had spoken all session. The polish was gone from his voice. The architecture of authority that had been so carefully present in every syllable since the meeting began had quietly stepped aside, and what was left was something much simpler and much more honest. A question, from one species to another, will you help us? Darius did not make him wait. Yes, he said. No conditions attached to that word. No qualifications trailing behind it. Just yes, clean and immediate, the way humans say yes when they mean it completely and are not interested in making the other person work for it. Vrexen's shoulders, which had been carrying something invisible and heavy since approximately the moment Darius had said 41,000 vessels, moved fractionally downward. Not much. But enough. There is one condition, Darius said. Vrexen's shoulders came back up slightly. Not a negotiating condition, Darius said, reading the room with the ease of someone who has spent a lifetime reading rooms. I am not asking for resources or territory or a seat at the head of this table. The condition is simpler than that. He looked around at each delegate in turn. Quelith. Zorvath. The Volmori representative. The Drethkai delegate. Vrexen. Stop calling us primitive, he said. The words were delivered without heat. Without the compressed energy of an old grievance finally being released. Without any of the emotional charge that the council might have expected from a species being told its feelings were hurt. Just a calm, clear, reasonable statement from a man who had thought about this carefully and knew exactly what he wanted to say and why. Stop calling us emotional. Stop calling us inefficient. Stop writing reports that measure us against your standards of civilization and conclude that we are a less developed version of you. He paused. We are not a less developed version of you. We are a completely different thing entirely, and the sooner this council understands that, the better equipped you will be to understand what you are actually dealing with when you deal with us. Quelith looked at the closed report under his hands for the third time in the last hour. The expression on his face was one that academics wear when they are confronting the possibility that a significant body of work needs to be fundamentally reconsidered. It is not a comfortable expression. I am not saying this because we are offended, Darius continued. I want to be precise about that. Human feelings about what this council has been saying for 200 years are not the reason for this condition. The reason is practical. He leaned forward slightly. Those words, primitive, emotional, inefficient, kept you from understanding what we actually are. And that misunderstanding is not a small thing. It is not a diplomatic inconvenience or a minor gap in your intelligence reports. That misunderstanding is the reason you spent 400 years managing a problem instead of solving it. The weight of that landed on the table between them and stayed there. 400 years, not because the council lacked resources. Not because the Vorkai were unstoppable. But because for 400 years the council had been looking for a solution within the set of species it respected, measuring each one against its standards of logic and efficiency and civilization, and humanity had kept failing those measurements, so humanity had stayed on the outside of the conversation. While worlds burned at the edges of the galaxy, Zorvith made a sound that was not quite a word. Something between a breath and a syllable. The sound a person makes when a realization arrives that is too large and too late at the same time. Vrexen looked at Darius for a long moment. You are saying, he said slowly, that the qualities we dismissed you for are the same qualities that make you capable of handling this. I am saying, Darius replied, that a species who survived 17 extinction-level events, who rebuilt cities while sick, who outlasted an ice age on stubbornness alone, who calls a 400-year-old existential threat Tuesday, is exactly the kind of species you want standing between you and something that has been destroying worlds. He held Vrexen's gaze. And you almost did not call us. Because your report said we were emotional. Quelith quietly turned his closed report face down on the table. It was a small gesture, but everyone saw it, and everyone understood that it was the closest thing to an admission that a 9-award-winning academic was capable of producing in a single afternoon. Vrexen was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that is not empty but full. Full of the particular weight that comes from understanding something that cannot be understood and then set aside. Something that changes the shape of other things. We will amend our language, he said finally. Good, Darius said. And the alliance? Vrexen asked. Darius looked at him with the calm certainty of a man who had already known the answer to this question before he walked through the door. We already said yes, he said simply. 3 months later, the Vorkai had a process. It was not a complicated process. It did not need to be complicated because it had worked, without exception, for 400 years. You found an inhabited system. You sent the fear transmission. The fear transmission was a carefully engineered broadcast containing a precise combination of sound frequencies, visual data, and mathematical demonstrations of force that had been specifically designed, over centuries of refinement, to communicate one message with absolute clarity to any species that received it. The message was, "We are coming, you cannot stop us. And resistance is not something we are interested in entertaining." Every species that had ever received it had responded the same way. Panic. Scrambling. Desperate last transmissions to whatever governing body they hoped might save them. The particular frequency of terror that a civilization broadcasts when it understands, fully and completely, that it is out of options. The process worked every time. The Vorkai sent the fear transmission to the human fleet and waited. The human fleet responded with a song, not a military broadcast. Not a counter-transmission of force calculations or weapons demonstrations or any of the things that would have at least fit into a category the Vorkai understood. A song. Actual music. Transmitted back across the same frequency with the casual confidence of someone changing the subject at a party. The Vorkai fleet commander listened to it for several seconds, then he listened to it again, then he had 3 of his senior officers listen to it independently and report back to him. Because he wanted to make sure he was not experiencing some kind of equipment malfunction, that he was not experiencing a malfunction, the humans had received the most sophisticated fear transmission in the known galaxy and responded with a song. The fleet commander did not know what to do with this. He had a process. The process did not have a branch for this. In the Council Monitoring Center, 17 light-years away, Queleth sat in front of a live feed of the exchange with both hands flat on the console and the expression of a man watching something that his entire career had not prepared him to witness. The song played through the feed speakers. He did not recognize it. He did not understand the lyrics. The transmission had come with a translation, but the translation was not helping because the words were the kind of words that required context he did not have. He looked at the translation. He looked at the feed. He looked at the translation again. We are the champions, it said. We are the champions. No time for losers. He turned to Zorvith, who was sitting beside him with the focused expression of someone doing rapid research on a handheld screen. What is this? Queleth asked. Looking it up, Zorvith said. He looked it up. The song was very old by human standards. Ancient, practically, in the context of a civilization that had only been in space for 30 years. It had been written and recorded in a period of human history that predated their first satellite. It had been played at sporting events, at moments of victory, at celebrations of achievement across centuries of human culture. It was, according to the reference Zorvith was reading, one of the most universally recognizable songs in human history. They had transmitted it to a species that had been destroying worlds for 400 years. As a response to a fear transmission, Zorvith read the lyrics fully. All of them. The whole song, verse by verse, in translated context, with the cultural annotations the reference provided so that the meaning was as clear as it could possibly be made to someone who had not grown up human. He read it once, then he read it again, then he set the screen face down on the console in front of him, which was a gesture that felt familiar to everyone in the room because Queleth had done the same thing with his report 3 months ago, and the energy was identical, the energy of a person who has just finished reading something and needs a moment before they are ready to rejoin the world. Zorvith stood up. He walked to the small cabinet on the side wall of the monitoring center, the one that contained various substances that various species on the council found calming in moments of stress. He found something suitable. He poured himself a measure of it. A generous measure. The kind of measure you pour when you have just understood something that is going to change the way you think about a situation permanently and you want to ease the transition. He stood there for a moment, drink in hand, looking at nothing in particular. On the feed, the song was still playing. The Vorkai fleet had not moved in 400 years of conquest, across dozens of systems, through every variation of resistance and desperation and last-ditch attempts at negotiation that a doomed civilization could produce. The Vorkai had never encountered this. A species that received their fear transmission and sent back a victory song, not a defensive victory song. Not "we survived you." Not "please leave us alone." We are the champions, present tense. Before the battle had even started, Zorvith took a long sip of his drink. Queleth, still staring at the feed, said quietly, "They are not even afraid." Zorvith thought about the 17 extinction-level events. He thought about the cities rebuilt by people who were still sick. He thought about an ice age survived on stubbornness. He thought about 41,000 vessels not including reserves. He thought about a man who knew the number 17 without looking it up. He thought about the word Tuesday. "No," he said. "They are not." On the feed, the human fleet began to move forward, still playing the song. Queleth watched them go. He had spent 200 years studying humans and writing reports about what he found, and he had been wrong about almost all of it, and he was, for the first time in a very long career, genuinely, completely, and with no reservations whatsoever, grateful for that, because the alternative, the version of events where the Council had continued to dismiss humanity as primitive and emotional and inefficient and had never made that call 3 months ago, that version of events had an ending that nobody in this room wanted to think about too carefully. He watched the human fleet close the distance. The song played. The Vorkai, for the first time in 400 years, did not advance, and somewhere in the cold dark between the stars, something that had never learned the word fear was beginning, slowly and for the first time, to understand it.